So welcome to the Market Mentors podcast, Andy.
Thanks very much.
No worries. So before we dig into this, I'd love to know what your relationship is with demand generation.
I love demand generation. Love it. Can't get enough of it. So it's an interesting one because I've seen over time the rhetoric has changed around it, because originally when I first started it was lead generation and now it's demand generation. Yeah. And people always thought there's a big difference between lead generation and demand generation. I think there is somewhat, but so in my career I've always had a big element of my focus has always been on lead gen or demand gen, whatever you want to call it. But I'll get to the differences now in a minute. But I started my career as an SDR and then went into account management, then went into marketing because I wanted to earn less cash. I did that because I had studied marketing, but I understood like the basics of lead generation from an outbound perspective before I went into the marketing world. And when people started talking to me about lead gen, I had no idea what they were talking about. So like simple things, like I remember my boss at the time, many years ago, we were going to a trade show and he's like, did you print out the lead gen forms? And I was like, I would if I knew what a lead gen form was, so I had no idea. I didn't have any connection, but I just knew that we needed to have meaningful conversations. So, and then from there on in, I really gathered like a lot of interest around lead gen and then just thought about different ways in order to get in front of personas on target accounts, really. Like, how do I do it? How can I encourage sales to do it? How can I help sales to do it? How can I do it from a marketing perspective? And I did that with a number of different companies. So did it with Amarsis, which has just recently been acquired by SAP. I was a global head of demand gen there for a number of years. Did it at Exponia, did it at Leadfeeder, and now I'm doing it with a number of different tech companies across the globe. And everybody has that problem around like not being able to generate enough leads and not being able to generate enough demand. And that just brings me to what's the difference in lead gen, demand gen? Yeah. Lead gen is very focused on, going out and bringing in individuals and getting to download pieces of content, for example. Whereas demand generation is more about creating awareness for your brand and people recognizing it and them coming to you. So one approach, lead gen, is very much you going out. The other one is very much bringing them in. But they sort of meet in the middle somewhere, right? So it's you can't say this is a lead gen activity and that's a demand gen activity. I tend not to separate the two, but lead gen has sort of flowed into demand gen over the past years, but there's still a lot of the typical old school lead gen tactics are still involved in that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, actually, because we get some companies that will pull us up a little bit in terms of, look, this is demand gen and actually lead gen is something very different. But for some of the teams that you've worked in then, how often have you sort of separated them out as roles, or do you tend to have somebody that would do both?
So you can call it whatever you want. So like, I think people, yes and no, right? In terms of defining it with that name, demand gen. Like, you're creating demand by everything that you're doing from a brand perspective, how you represent yourself out to the world. All of the different activities that you're doing are creating demand, should be creating demand. If they're not, then you're doing a bad job, right? Lead gen is also the same. So lead gen is actually a part of demand generation. But everything you're doing from a marketing perspective should be generating demand. Like, so you could rename marketing to demand generation.
Yeah.
In my mind, because if it's creating, like, what else? What are you doing as a marketer that's not creating demand, or it doesn't have the end goal to get in front of somebody in order to interest them in what you have to sell?
Yeah, I think some people lose the point.
Exactly, and that's people that don't understand marketing. Unfortunately.
So, I mean, we're here to talk about sort of building demand generation engines. What would you say are some of the key components at a sort of high level to building a good demand generation engine?
Okay, so first of all, it's the approach, and then we can get into people. And the people piece as well depends on which stage you're at, right? The approach as well, to a certain respect, but there's things that a lot of companies would probably want to do or claim to do that they're probably not doing in that approach side of things. So nowadays, you need to be doing some level of account-based marketing. If you're not doing account-based marketing, you need to start. And the companies that don't do account-based marketing right now are the ones that maybe are a little bit afraid of it, or not fully certain of how to do it, or they think it involves a massive investment, or they need to have a huge amount of resource in order to pull it off. None of the above is true. You can do account-based marketing like tomorrow for very little money. you know, and I can bring you through like what that entails. It's just, first of all, as a company, sitting down and understanding what is your ideal customer. Okay. And a lot of companies will get this wrong, right? Because they'll be looking at what their current customer base looks like. And if you do that, as let's say, for example, you're a tech startup in the SaaS space and you're at about 5 million ARR. In order to get to 5 million ARR, so annual recurring revenue, you will need to beg, borrow, and steal in order to get whatever type of business in through the door. Unless you're one of those companies that were super focused since day one, saying we are only going to work with this type of company, right? Which are very few and far between. Okay. So unless you're that company, you're going to have a lot of differing types of customers in your data, right? So if you're trying to figure out who is our ideal customer by looking at our data, you might be a little bit confused, or you might come up with the wrong hypothesis based on who the business that you're currently working with is. Now, that's when you sit down as an organization and say, what are the companies that we want to work with? Like, what is the best product market fit? Like, which particular space actually works best with what we have to offer? Okay. Once you define that, you've come up with a hypothesis. It may not be the case, but you've come up with a hypothesis. Use that hypothesis then to create your total addressable market. And your total addressable market is simply the companies that you want to do business with. And to do that, you use a tool like Cognizant, for example, to plug in little pieces of industry information or filters such as like revenue size, company size, where they're based, etc. Okay, pull that company list, and you'd be surprised if you're operating across Europe. That company list can be somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 accounts. Okay, take that list, refine it a little bit. Then what you've got all the companies in one list in which you want to do business with. Now, you probably have a sales team, because otherwise you wouldn't have 5 million in ARR, right? You give that over to your sales team and say, hey, this is your holy grail. These are the companies that you need to go chase. You need to create an account plan for the top companies in this. So you probably would want to tier it out. So you tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 accounts. Tier 1 being like top level. They're the ones that we can spend a bit more cash on. Tier 2, middle of the road. And tier 3, sort of the everyday run rate ones. Okay. Give that to sales. Give the same list to marketing. Marketing then do campaigns. How do you run a campaign with an ABM list or a TAM list? Upload it to LinkedIn and just target those companies with content, right? Get them downloading pieces of content. At the same time, maybe think of something like a direct mail piece. Get that direct mail piece produced, get it out the door, get the SDRs and sales team following up with it, get those leads coming into their sequences in the sales team. Sales, marketing, both at the same time, going after the same list of accounts. Sales from outbound, marketing from inbound. And everybody's working together in order to tailor to those lists of accounts. And that's how you do ABM. It's not rocket science.
No.
And of course, I'm after describing it much easier now than what it is, of course.
Well, you do make it sound easy.
But I think people, we do this too much as marketers to make it sound difficult. It's not. It's really not.
Well, you could argue it's good marketing. Understanding your customer, taking a message that's going to resonate to them. You know, let's put ABM to one side. It sounds to me like good marketing.
ABM is nothing new. Everyone's like, oh, it's a big buzzword, it's a new thing. I mean, it's like, you should have always been doing that. If you haven't been trying to connect with the companies in which you want to do business with, what the hell have you been doing? You know?
Yeah, no, I agree. So let's say, for instance, you're parachuted in. Obviously, you do a bit of fractional work as a marketeer at the moment. But if you were parachuted into a startup there, what does your sort of first 90 days look like?
Okay, so first thing I would look at is the current state of affairs. So where I would start would be, what are our revenue targets? So I'd look at revenue targets, then look at, okay, where are we at in terms of current pipeline being generated, and what's our conversion rate from pipeline to close one new revenue? Typically, everybody says 25%. It's a lie. It's probably somewhere around 17 to 18%, but depending on the stage that you're at, you probably don't have a huge amount of data in order to back that up. So based on experience, somewhere 17, 18%, right? And then based off of that, then I'll say, okay, what's your sales cycle? Everybody will tell you it's 90 days. It's a lie. It's probably somewhere between 90 to 180 days. You're even going to go like 360 days, the larger accounts. If you're talking about annual contract values of like somewhere around, I don't know, over 100 to 150K per annum, depending on the size of your brand and so on, you can talk about like very, very long sales cycles, right? So I'll make some assumptions. So I'll say, okay, where do our problems lie from a business perspective? Typically, it's in pipeline. So typically what will happen is they say, we've got a 200K target that we need to close an annual recurring revenue within the next quarter, and we now have 70K in the pipeline. We'll be grand. And I was like, you will not be grand, because you've got like at least a 90-day sales cycle and you only have 70 grand in the pipe. Yeah. Where is that going to come? Like, in order to close that 200K, you need to be getting a minimum of $1 million into the pipeline. Yeah. So it's just something missing. So then I'd say, okay, well, with that, what I'll do is I'll look at, okay, how much pipeline do we need to create in order to hit targets? And I'll automatically just start shifting all of the marketing focus onto pipeline build. What I'll do with that is get the SDR team or the sales team plus the marketing team working together on things that will help book more meetings for the sales team. And whether that's creating specialized pieces of content, which are then pushed out on LinkedIn to get interactions, as well as direct mail pieces, whatever it might be. There's a number of different things I have in my playbook there. Like it's typically like some form of meaningful touch point. So call it webinar, ebook, video content. So around with like a customer case, for example, and then some form of direct mail piece, which is great. And then also helping the sales team with a follow-up after somebody does something meaningful and interacts with us, right? So there's normally like a lot of different places that are broken here amongst that. And then what I'll do is, based on the pipeline and based on some conversion rates that I know across the industry, typically in tech, I'll then build out the entire funnel. So, okay, we need to be bringing in this amount of leads in order to deliver that amount of pipeline or to deliver that amount of meetings. And what we can do is start to look at different conversion rates within that funnel, see how we can improve. So, for example, if we're bringing in marketing qualified leads and a conversion rate from marketing qualified to sales meeting booked, I would look at, okay, that's a 1% conversion rate. I would say, okay, how can we get it to 2? And then focus the marketing efforts on that. And as I said, typically the reason why you're looking for a marketer at early stage, say 5 million ARR, is because they're looking to scale their sales efforts. Yeah. And that's how you scale the sales efforts. And typically people are like, oh no, we have a revenue generation problem right now. And that's when the alarm bell goes off. We need to invest in all these different areas. Yeah,
well, I like how you're talking, and you can certainly sort of hear your sort of sales background coming through as well from your early days. But you talked about some of the tactics there. I mean, how do you go about deciding exactly what tactics to use then?
So again, it depends on what's happening in the funnel. So if I see, let's say, for example, we're taking forever to close deals. Like we've said that we have a 90-day sales cycle, but in reality, even for small fry deals, we're talking about 180 days, even for small deals. Then I'd be like, there's something wrong there. And some of the time, or quite a lot of the time, it's actually trusting that company as a prospect, trusting the company that you're going to invest in because they're a startup. And how do you gain trust? You gain trust by seeing other people use that company, right? So a simple example, during my time at Exponia, we were competing with some of the larger retail or larger tech providers in the market, such as Salesforce, Adobe, and Oracle. Okay, so big multinationals that everybody knows. Like my mother knows who Salesforce are, so that's a good indication that they're big, right? My mother does not work in the tech space. So the thing with that is that you need to prove your worth. And how do you prove your worth? You prove your worth by showing that you work with other bigger brands in the space in which you're selling into. So what we would have done back in the Exponia days is we would have, in contracts with new clients, we would always put in a clause around doing some customer announcement or customer video or something. And what we would do is then, before it even get implemented, we'd be going and having a chat with these guys, getting them on camera and getting them to show the fact, this is why we chose Exponia, because of X, Y, Z. And we did that with a number of big brands in the UK. For example, River Island, Misguided, the Arcadia Group. And we did those things, and we were not big in comparison to the bigger players in the market, but we started to create waves within that space within retailers, because they were looking at us like being like, oh, hey, Exponia are working together with River Island. That's interesting. And when you get that into the bottom of funnel and you start pushing that out on all channels and surrounding people within those companies which are already an active pipeline opportunity, and you're just drumming that message, we work together with River Island, we work together with River Island, we're able to solve that problem with River Island, we're able to do this with Arcadia Group, we're able to do this with Misguided. That helps speed up sales cycles. So based on your question, it's like, where do I go with that? It depends on where the problems lie.
Yeah.
That's where the problem. If that's a bottom of funnel problem. If we have a top of funnel problem, it's normally because the content that we're pushing out is not great.
Yeah.
So how do I make it a bit more exciting? How do I make it a bit more like interesting for the prospect? And I'll work on that with the content team, whoever's running content, and then push that out. Right? If we're having problems getting meetings we're getting enough leads in, but we're not getting enough meetings from those leads, then I'll look at what's happening in between there. And typically it's because of the follow-up or the outreach. And then I'll look at, okay, how can marketing then help SDRs or sales teams with that outreach by providing them with some advice, but also with things like content. So can we do more written case studies for them, get them into their sequences? Is there something that we can be doing to help them out on LinkedIn? Is there a webinar that maybe we could do in order for them to come in and to get them to invite people to that's a softer touch point than booking a demo? All of these different things.
Makes sense. And how would you balance those sort of short-term things versus longer plays like SEO and content and stuff like that?
So it depends on the business, right? So if you're talking about a volume business, so that's doing lots of very transactional, like your website is your shop store. Because there are like Leadfeeder, for example, the company I just came from, they were very transactional, very volume-based business, like 7,000 paying customers, and at sort of 12 million ARR. So with that, SEO is incredibly important. So you want to make sure that you have somebody on the team that's very understands that side of things like the back of their hand from a technical perspective, most importantly, because there's probably a ton of things that you can improve from a technical perspective on your site. And then on top of that, also from a content creation perspective. So what's dragging more eyeballs onto your site, right? In the on the larger tech space, so if you're talking about not larger tech space, larger deal size space. So if you're talking about ACVs of sort of, I don't know, over 50K, then SEO and so on is important, but it's not that important. So what you need to be doing is probably creating more meaningful content, which will resonate within your total addressable market. But I wouldn't be looking at it from perspective, is this going to suit really well on Google? It should be. There should be elements of it there, but that's not the number one priority. And it should never be the number one priority for a large tech company that's selling large like multi tens of thousands of dollar deals to be focused very heavily on SEO. Tick all the boxes, and that's something that you should be doing from the start anyway. I'd always start working with a web agency if you can afford it in-house. Work together with a web agency, make sure that the site speed is okay. Before I work with anybody, I'll always do a Lighthouse score on their site, regardless of how large their ACVs are. If the Lighthouse score basically just looks, it's Google's way of like basically summarizing how healthy your site is. And it's very much based off site speed and site experience. Okay. If you've got a low Lighthouse score, then I'll be like, we need to get that fixed. And typically it's just removing scripts from the site, removing heavy images, just making the site speed go up a little bit more. And you can pay an agency to do that. And then at the same time, once you're creating content, this is very much part of my approach. Content is not just do an ebook. Content is do an ebook, and off the back of the ebook, there will be 6 blog posts. Off the back of that ebook as well, there'll be a webinar. And in the webinar, we're going to push the ebook. And then from the blog post, we're going to push the ebook. And then from the webinar, we're also going to take videos from that. So it starts to sort of spider web its way out, right? So that you're not just focused on single content pieces. So actually, in that short-term approach, you've actually got long-term things that are happening as well, because you can create many content pieces off of one. And that's what's leading then towards SEO and brand, etc.
Yeah, you're repurposing it basically, aren't you? And I understand what you're saying at the sort of enterprise level, because I guess when you're selling that kind of stuff, it's typically bought by committee anyway. And are those sort of senior level decision makers going onto Google and searching for stuff? Probably not. So it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and you need to be looking at other things then. Long-term plays in the enterprise space would be working together with analysts to try to appear in reports, for example. So you should be working together with Forrester and Gartner to get into Gartner Magic Quadrant or a Forrester Wave report. And that's what's going to get you in the doors with larger enterprise clients.
Makes sense. So if you're building this engine from scratch, then what sort of signals are you looking for to know that the engine is working?
So I'd always start with pipeline. So it's funny. I have this argument quite a lot with founders because they'll say to me, they're like, okay, how much of this revenue is going to come from this one campaign that you're running on LinkedIn? I'm like, that's just not how it works. I really wish it did. So I was like, let's just, because my approach is account-based marketing. It's always around account-based stuff. And account-based, as I said to you before, sales plus marketing working the same list of accounts. And what I want to avoid is, hey, no, that's our account or that's our opportunity. That's not a marketing opportunity. Because sales need to work the marketing opportunities anyway. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. So if we're hitting pipeline targets, then I'm happy, right? If we're not hitting pipeline targets, then what I'm looking at is I'm saying, okay, well, where's the problem elsewhere, right? So I'll be looking at number of meetings getting booked, looking at the number of opportunities being placed into the cycle, looking at the number of marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads in the funnel. So they're the areas I'd be looking at. But it will always start with pipe. The pipe's not fitting, that something else is broken and I need to go fix that specific thing.
Makes sense.
And a lot of in a lot of companies, they want to have that exact number of what's going to come from marketing. And if they want that, then I'll say, well, in that case, then I need to have the SDR team as well. Yeah. And then I'll say like 70% of the pipeline will come from SDRs and marketing together, because marketing leads go to SDRs, SDRs do the follow-up, and then they go to AEs then for opportunities.
Yeah, which is almost like a CRO role, isn't it, I guess?
Sort of, yeah. Chief commercial officer, sort of.
Yeah. What, when you're building these engines, what sort of challenges do you think most businesses face then, trying to get something up off the ground that's actually working?
I think a lot of the times they just don't know where to start. They don't know how to build a funnel. They don't know what the conversion rate should be between certain levels in the funnel. They don't have a good outreach method. They don't know which channels to invest in. There's a lot of unknowns, right? And it's like, I was talking about this to somebody earlier just before this. It's like, marketing is not rocket science. You just need to sort of have the checklist of things that you need to know what to do. It's not like, again, it's not something that's very, very difficult, but from my side, I'm quite lucky that I've managed to come into companies that have gotten quite a bit of investment over the years. So the first tech company I went to, I think we got almost 50 million when I first joined. So we had a lot of money to play with. And the whole point was then go spend that to try to increase logos on the wall, do it through marketing and sales, right? So we tested a lot of things, made a huge amount of mistakes, things that didn't work, right? And a lot of companies don't have that within them to have that knowledge to know what works, what doesn't work. And half the problem a lot of the times is you have a junior marketer on board that's taking orders from maybe the CEO. And the CEO is like, marketing's easy, just, do X, Y, Z, and it's going to be fine. It doesn't work. And it doesn't work. And the CEO is like, well, you're not doing it right. I was like, that's not quite how it works. The problem is a lot of the time that other C-levels think that they know how marketing works because everybody has an opinion on marketing. That's the thing about it. But you have to gain experience knowing what works, what doesn't work, what certain types of methods work, what processes you need to put in place, and all these different things. But the number one factor normally is that they just don't know what to do.
Yeah. And, I think we are surrounded by so many messages these days, so many, try this tactic, try that tactic. Here's a new thing. Here's a new tool. Here's it is quite difficult. I'm sort of responsible for our marketing here, and you can get, unless you're sort of laser focused, pulled in so many different avenues, and actually you just end up staying still.
That's the thing. And what can happen as well is that people expect immediate results. So in the tech space in particular, people are very impatient, very, very impatient. So what typically ends up happening, like this is a good example, Matt, like you're doing a podcast, right? Now, I've been with companies before where they're like, we're going to start a podcast after 3 episodes. How much revenue has that driven so far? You're like, do you know what I mean? But that's the type of thing that happens. And then you're looking at specific, like individual marketing tactics and being like, how much revenue has that driven in the past 3 days? And I was like, we're selling $100,000 deals here. Like it's not, because sometimes this happens that somebody goes to an event, they see a presentation by somebody and somebody's had success with a specific thing. And it's like, oh, we need to do that, drop everything, do that. And if it doesn't turn into revenue tomorrow, then stop it and do something else. So it's,
Well, marketers are their own worst enemies sometimes, aren't they, with that kind of stuff? Here's a playbook, and it's by the time you get around to doing the playbook, it's already been played so many times. It's no longer an innovative thing.
I agree.
What about sort of tech then? I mean, a lot of marketeers kind of focus on MarTech, the marketing tech stack. So what are your thoughts on that? How important is it to get something in place from the get-go? What sort of tools do you typically suggest?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of companies think that tech is going to save their life. It won't. How you use the tech and your approach, your methodology to actually getting in front of more prospects is what's going to save your life. So I know lots of companies that'll be like, we just need to invest in SalesLoft, and we need to get Salesforce, and we need to get HubSpot from a marketing perspective, and we need to get Cognism, and we need to get another tool we're going to need Gong as well to record all of our calls. And it's like, you haven't even started picking up the phone yet, lads. So before you start investing in massive amount of technology, start doing the basics right. Basics being on the sales and SDR side, make sure that the follow-up is okay. Are they picking up the phones? A lot of companies nowadays don't pick up the phone. They don't like it. Company or individuals don't like cold calling. It's something that I grew up doing, and it's part of most sales roles. But in the past couple of years, it's dropped a lot, and it's something that works time and time again. Are you surrounding prospects on LinkedIn? Again, on your sales side, are you doing that correctly? Have you gotten somebody in maybe to show people how to do it on the sales team? There are people out there that do that, right? How's your email game? Is it strong or not? Email is like, typically what you'll see is they're just doing the email, right? And not doing any of the other things, right? And so what happens there is you're just firing out massive amount of emails and not getting anything in return, okay? So if you try to surround prospects by using those 3 channels, get those basics right. Then on the marketing side, if you will need to start investing in some technology if you want to build out your total addressable market. There are more expensive tools and more cheaper tools out there, but if you want to look at like some tools that I would recommend, for example, for building that TAM, I typically use Cognism. Cognism is their data is very solid, right? It gives you account data. It also gives you intent data about certain search terms that are coming up from certain companies online. You can also get contact data from it. And it comes in a good chunk cheaper than the likes of Zoom Info. Zoom Info is very expensive. If you want to go even cheaper than that, there are things like Seamless AI that you'll be able to use. Lusha, for example, which is another tool that you can use to build out that total addressable market, and then also give contacts across over to the sales org as well. Okay, so like if you want to invest there, then you have your total addressable market built, and then all you really need to do is take that and then start firing on different channels. I would suggest that you should probably have some level of marketing automation platform, whether that's a HubSpot or whatever it is. Like you don't need to have it from day one, right? Don't get me wrong. You don't need to have all the bells and whistles from day one. What you do need to have is somewhere where leads are flowing into that you're able to do some qualification for and then get them in front of the sales team. Yeah. That's the most important thing. And if you do that via Slack, great. You can create a Zapier integration between something and Slack, and leads just appear in Slack. And then it's then maybe you can have it into your whatever CRM you're using. On the sales side, I would recommend tools such as Lead Feeder. Like it's a very, very cheap tool to use, and it will just give you some insights in terms of which companies are visiting your site, to give you some prioritization in terms of which contacts or which companies to call first, right? More than that, starting, you don't need like when you get a little bit bigger, you can go for like some outreach. When you have a scalable model, like when you have something that's working and you're like, oh no, now we need to start scaling this and getting this out to more people and casting a wider net. Like let's say, for example, you have a sequence of different events that you do as a salesperson. Touch point on LinkedIn, phone call, email, whatever it might be. And you want to scale that and get more contacts added to that specific sequence so that you're constantly doing this replicable thing over and over again, seeing which sequences are working against other SDRs and whatnot. Then something like Outreach or SalesLoft or SalesView or even HubSpot sequences will work well for you, right? But don't invest in that thinking just by having that all of a sudden you're going to start booking meetings all over the place. It's not how it works. Get the basics right. Then if you need to scale it or when you have to scale it, then invest in that technology.
Well, those companies are very good at their marketing, so they would certainly have you believe that they are the silver bullets. But yeah, in essence, learn to drive and then buy the car. Absolutely. And so don't get me wrong. I think these companies are great. But they're only as good as the information that you put into them. So that's the most important part. You will only see good results if you fuel it with good material.
Shitty material will equal shitty results. Sorry, you'll have to bleep that.
Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. I'm sure our audience can cope with it. So that's cool. So what about if a company's looking to hire a demand gen marketer then, their first demand gen marketer, what advice would you give to a founder? Obviously, apart from hiring yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I think you need to look at two different things. First of all, what's your business model? If you're on that volume business model, you should probably be looking at somebody that's got that's in growth marketing. That's the new phrase, growth marketing. But typically, growth marketing is. I'd look at certain areas. If have they done extensive A/B testing, for example? Have they been like testing? Testing is the most important thing there, and what type of results they've gotten from that testing. How often are they seeing uptakes in the test that they're running? If they've run tests for a year and see no uptakes, that'd be a red flag for me, right? Which happens quite often. But if they're consistently and constantly testing, that would be like a good key area to look at for somebody that's in the volume business, because you're driving large amounts of traffic to your site and you need that traffic to convert. So do they have conversion rate optimization experience, and how are they getting that conversion rate optimization by constant testing? Okay. Then second of all, if you're more on the enterprise side of things, so as opposed to the volume sales, so few customers with much larger revenue, right? You should be looking at the tactics in which they've done before. Do they understand account-based marketing? Have they done account-based marketing before? Yes or no, right? What has been the approach that they've taken to account-based marketing? How do they view the world? Do they look at the world through leads, or do they look at true revenue? So if they look at it through leads, you're probably going to be spelling some trouble there. Because typically the way that works is if they're just looking at leads, I've generated 1,000 leads last month. Nobody cares if it doesn't turn into meetings, if it doesn't turn into opportunities, if it doesn't turn into revenue. Okay. Like, and if they're focused more on their lead generation or the number of leads that they're creating, that would be a massive red flag to me. If they start with revenue or pipeline that's being generated by the team that they're working with, then they're focused on the end goal, which is ultimately the reason why you're hiring somebody, is to generate more revenue, not to generate more leads. Right? It generate more leads, part of it, but the end goal should always be around that pipeline generation, revenue closing. So if you want the experience there, a couple of red flags for me. Somebody that's been doing a lot of lead gen stuff, has ABM experience, and then has also been focused on creating pipeline. That's their core target.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make. And I don't know if you follow Chris, I'm trying to think of his surname now, but Chris at Refine Labs. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So he talks very much about marketeers being too focused on MQLs rather than actual revenue. So it's a really good point. So Andy, how do you stay up to date on everything demand generation related?
So, well, I think because I'm working with so many different clients, I'm constantly testing different things with different clients. Testing is a big part. And then I also, I have a guy, right? I have a guy that I've hired a number of different times. He's worked for me in a couple of different companies. And he's like a whiz kid when it comes to marketing tech and what's new in the market. And I've also helped him find other jobs. So I owe him favors, he owes me favors. So basically what we do is we're good mates, actually. We catch up probably, I don't know, a couple of times a month. We're on Slack or one another, and we just catch up. He's another guy based over here in Austria. And I pick his brain, he picks my brain. And he's a complete tech geek, right? A complete tech geek. Whereas I'm more the loud voice and out there in front of people and so on. Whereas he's behind the scenes underneath the desk figuring out what works best, right? And I'd be giving him some of my high level these are the webinar guests I'm going after. He's like, oh, we should do that as well. That's a good idea. And I'd have him with that. And then on the very specific tech side and what's working, what isn't working, what are they seeing success in, and so on, he's coming back to me. So we've got this really good back and forth relationship, and he's a genius, this guy that I work with. So that's probably the number one way in which I keep up to date. But as well as that, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I've got a good network of people there as well that I constantly stay in touch with, from sales influencer space mostly, and then also on the marketing influencer space somewhat. Sales influencer space most definitely, the likes of Michael Hansen and from Growth Genie, and Morgan Ingram from JB Burrows, and like Dale Dupree from the Sales Rebellion, and Tyler Lassard from Vidyard. Like, we all catch up semi-regularly in terms of what's working, what isn't. And, you know, COVID has really helped with that, actually, to build that community. So, yeah, that's where I do most of my learning.
Perfect. Now, for people that want to reach you, Andy, I know you're busy at the moment anyway, but if anybody wants to get in touch with you about future work or ideas or whatever it might be, what's the best way of them doing that?
Best way to do it right now is get me on LinkedIn. I also have my own site, andyculligan.com. It's about to go live, but if you go to that, you're going to get we're about to go live page. So, best place to really reach out to me is on LinkedIn. I'm very active there, as I said. So please just reach out, and happy to have a chat.
Perfect. Well, I've really enjoyed this chat. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Matt.
No worries.